that of the immortal Sally Bowles in I Am a Camera. Well, her fame as a stage actress has been constant in America for the last quarter of a century. And now she's here in London playing the leading role. In fact, it's the only role in a play called The Belle of Amherst, which tells the life story of the American poet Emily Dickinson. Welcome to Afternoon, Miss Harris.
Thank you, Elaine.
And first, why has it taken so long for you to appear on the British stage?
Well, I think because I've always been frightened of coming here to act, because to me this is actor's heaven. By that I mean, I think the greatest actors that I've ever seen in the world are English, and I love the English theatre, and I don't know, I haven't had really that much opportunity. By that I mean the offers haven't been given to me. There was once talk about doing a play that I had done in New York, 40 Carats, a French play, and they wanted me to do that in London. But I thought, no, that's not an American play. I would like to do, when I come to London on the stage, an American play. And this play is very American.
Can we just go back to your Hollywood days briefly, and two of the great American male actors that you worked with there? One, of course, James Dean in East of Eden. Can you understand the cult that seems to grow rather than diminish with every year after his death?
Well, I think Jimmy made only three movies.
The first one
The first
he made
one was
with you.
East of Eden. Then there was Rebel Without a Cause and Giant. He did some work on the stage and some work in television. But those three films were very powerful. And he was an extraordinary actor. He was lovable. He had, to me, a kind of charisma that Gary Cooper had, that you wouldn't want. I think people hang on to it and hang on to his legend because it's sad that he left us so fast. And he was so colorful and so interesting, so dynamic.
What about Brando? I was wondering if you worked with him in New York on the stage, or in your training.
I never worked with Marlon on the stage. I made a screen test with him once for Viva Zapata. Mr. Kazan wanted me to see if I would be Spanish-looking. Well, I'm not very Spanish-looking, Mexican. And then I did a film with Marlon, Reflections in a Golden Eye. I love Marlon. He's an extremely talented actor, has genius, I think. And he and Jimmy, they said Marlon is a little older than Jimmy Dean, but when Jimmy came along, they said it was sort of Brando-like.
It does strike me, though, that your devotion to the stage has remained unchanged. Don't you feel it's rather sad that Brando has abandoned his original career and he's now, when I say just a film actor, I'm not demeaning the role of the film actor, but if only he could have kept up both.
Well, but I've stopped superimposing my desires onto other people. Yes, it would have been wonderful if he could have been a great stage actor, but that wasn't what he wanted to do.
Can we talk now about The Belle of Amherst? If I say it's a one-woman show, that gives an absolutely wrong idea of what it is. Technically, I'm correct, aren't I?
Yes, it is a one-woman play.
Yeah, that's the difference.
But it is a play. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it has its peaks and its valleys. It has scenes in it, you know. It's a whole day in the life of this remarkable genius poet who lived a very simple life on the outside, but who lived a very complicated interior life. And although seemingly it was an uneventful life, it wasn't actually.
In a strange sense, it was a weird life. She locked herself away in the family house in New England.
Yes.
She was born in 1830.
Yes.
Now, how old was she when she seemed to give up the world the physical world outside?
It was somewhere in the 1860s. So it was gradually, it was the last 15, 17 years of her life that she gradually withdrew and hardly left the father's grounds. Now, I have been to Amherst, Massachusetts, and I wouldn't mind being a prisoner on those grounds. I wouldn't feel very isolated, actually. And I think English people can appreciate, because Amherst is very like an English village. The house is on Main Street. It's off the street. It has an enormous garden, and when Emily lived there, there were fields behind the house, probably 4 or 5 acres, so that you felt you were on an estate. And from her room, which faces the front of the house, you can see 2 mountain ranges. Now, these mountain ranges were like the ocean to her. I mean, the atmosphere of Amherst kept changing by these mountains. They were the Pelham Hills and the Holyoke Range, and they were always changing in color, in temperament, with the seasons. And there is, Elaine, the most glorious maple tree on the side of the house, which is one of those huge old ancient trees which towers over the house. And she had her gardening, she had her cooking, she was her father's. He insisted on a kind of custard that Emily made for him. She was famous for making a black cake, and for her gingerbread, which she made for the children. And I've seen the little oval cakes. They were oval, about this size, and she put a frosting on the gingerbread. I've never heard of anyone frosting gingerbread, but she did. And she would lower these little cakes in a basket from her room down to the children who came to call, her brother's children mostly, and their friends. And that was a great sort of excitement when Aunt Emily said, "I've made gingerbread," and the children would come, and this basket would be lowered to the children below on the ground.
She had no appreciation in her life, I mean, as far as her work concerned.
She had 7 poems published. They were published anonymously, so her name was not connected with them. This friend of hers, Helen Hunt Jackson, who was a well-known writer of her time and who wrote the book Ramona, which was very popular, was always after Emily in the latter part of her life to give her poems to publish. But you see, she'd had this extraordinary experience. She had answered an article in the Atlantic Monthly by Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who was a contributing editor to the Atlantic Monthly. And he wrote an article in which he expressed himself about young writers, and he more or less said that he would be willing to have people send him their work. Well, she sent him 4 poems, and he wrote her back because he was very taken with them, but he thought they were almost too extraordinary to publish. He thought the rhythm was uneven. He thought, he said the gait was spasmodic, and that they were, they had no, they needed more, how do you say that? They needed more discipline. So that frightened her, and she retreated from the idea of publishing. She actually very much wanted to be a famous poet of her time.
But this constant, rejection didn't interfere with her self-confidence or her courage, because she wrote, now it's estimated, almost 2,000, at least 1,700 poems in a comparatively brief life.
No, she said, my business is to sing, and she went on singing. And I have seen the fascicles, they call them fascicles, the little books that she made. She wrote, it was a page about this long, and she would write a poem on each page. Then with ordinary household sewing thread, she bound about 10 pages together into little books, almost as if this was the way she would like them to be published. Now these fascicles were found in the bottom drawer of one of her bureaus at the time of her death by her sister Lavinia. I mean 1700. And Lavinia and no one had any idea of the amount of poetry she had written.
That you were not just an actress performing a script that was brought to you. Your involvement with Emily Dickinson started many years ago, didn't it?
Yes, it did. I was, but unlike you told me, Elaine, that you were acquainted with her poetry when you were 17.
At 17.
Well, I was a little younger, but maybe I was 14 or 15 when we studied Emily Dickinson in high school, and I remember 3 or 4 poems, I'm Nobody, Who Are You, and a poem about a snake, and Hope is the Thing with Feathers, and maybe one other, Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Those were all I knew about this wonderful creature. Then I was asked when I was about, well, it was not long after my son was born, so maybe I was in my early 30s, and I was asked by Cadman Records to make a recording of the poems and letters of Emily Dickinson. And I worked with a wonderful man, Howard Sackler, and we recorded the poems and letters, a few. I subsequently made a second recording for Cadman. By that time, I had involved myself in her history, and I had gone out and bought the 3 volumes of the letters. And I began reading biographies, and I began to memorize the poems because I loved them, and they gave me comfort. They really, and joy. I mean, not only solace when I felt bad, but they gave me joy. They just shot me up. And I began, then I was asked by a school group to do a one-woman show on anything.
Which has
and
grown
I
into
chose to do Emily Dickinson.
this remarkable evening.
And I was once doing this show, and Charles Nelson Riley saw me do it, and that's when he started working on the play.
And my thanks to you, Julie Harris, for being our guests this afternoon.
Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you very much.